And I kept looking at the chat, and the huge number of people were reacting with their hearts, not just with their it was very emotional. I personally felt very emotional. I don't know where to start. Maybe let's start with the beginning and with the numbers of the incredible numbers of sharks that are killed. As I have noted, 100 million. And as it was said in the time we watched that movie, 35,000 sharks are being killed probably. I just wanted to turn to my panelists to let you know, to the audience that is following us, who they are, and maybe hear just very short introductory remarks by all of them. So we have with us, we've seen him in the movie, Peter Hammarstedt. Peter, you are the director of campaigns of Sea Shepherd Global. We saw you heading the Sea Shepherd Task Force for Africa. So you're working really in Africa, around Africa's continent, to patrol and report and eventually stop illegal fishing. And you also had a number of prizes, of awards for your work. So thank you very much for the courageous work you're doing. I read in your bio that you joined the Sea Shepherd when you were old enough to submit an application. So it was a sort of a very precocious vocation that you had there. Can you just tell us one word? I mean, what does it feel being confronted to this problem every day? And maybe just one word on how the movie, how the movie changed your life.
Well, thank you so much, Alessandra, and thank you everybody for watching the film. What I love about Sea Shepherd and what I love about the work that we do is that we're a very results-driven organization. We measure our success by the number of marine wildlife, by the number of sea creatures that our interventions are able to save, and we measure our success by the number of criminal operations that we're able to shut down. And so although seeing firsthand the slaughter of sharks is incredibly alarming and traumatizing, the reality is that we're at the scene of the crime and we're taking action to stop these crimes from taking place. And I'm incredibly proud of the fact that we have partnerships with 8 African coastal and island states, countries with the political will, countries like Liberia with the political will to stop illegal fishing, but countries whose economic resources are stretched. So they may not be able to patrol the entirety of their sovereign waters. And therefore they've teamed up with Sea Shepherd, and we're essentially providing the transportation, the vessel and the fuel and the crew to get these law enforcers to the scene of the crime. And what gives me a lot of hope and encouragement is that the country, in the waters of the countries where we've been working, like Liberia, Benin, Gabon, we've seen illegal fishing drastically reduced. I mean, we've been working with Liberia now for 5 years. And in the past 2 years, there hasn't been a single arrest because these patrols are now having a real deterrent effect, preventing these crimes from happening.
Sorry, that's very encouraging, Peter. Thank you very much for this word. Quite positive word. I have noticed at the beginning of the chat, somebody who was really shocked by the movie and said, please tell us that at the end of this movie, there will be something positive. So I'm happy to hear some solution offered. So I'm happy to hear what you just said, Peter, but we will talk more, I think, later on also with other panelists of the economic issues which are fundamental in this movie, really. I think it's the real heart of the problem. Let me go now to another of our panelists tonight. It's Lynn Sorrentino. Lynn, welcome. You are the Marine Program Officer with the International Union for Conservation of Nature, and you really focus on the issue of shark and ray areas and the mitigation of plastic pollution. We've seen elements in the movie which were also showing pollution. It's not the center, it's not the focus of the movie, but there were also things about that. But you work in general for the conservation of the whole ecosystem. Maybe can you tell us a little bit about this? Because we focus very much on the shark, but I think the film shows that this is a complex problem. It's not just shark, it's the whole marine ecosystem. Maybe just one word on this.
Sure, Alessandra, thank you so much. And thank you everyone for joining us today and for the empathy that I see that's coming through in the comments and questions. This was very difficult to watch, and what IUCN is doing is we work across a variety of issues. We do work on illegal and unregulated fishing. We do advocacy and policy work. We have partners in over 260 countries, or 200 plus countries, and 160 state members, where we are advocating for changing ways of doing things, and especially addressing issues like illegal fishing and the issues of gill nets. There are lots of different programs within the IUCN scope on ensuring that resources are used sustainably. And what that really means is, again, getting governments, legislators, communities, and the public involved in how to address these issues. I think the issue of shark finning, the issue of unsustainable fishing, the issues of really the unsustainable use of our ocean overall is quite pressing. I mean, the need for protein by humans seems to be driving a lot of this, and I think the economics that are related to this, which I think David can speak a little bit more to, are a big challenge that we need to work around so that we can stop doing what we are doing to the oceans. I think I was taking notes during the movie, and it said that by 2048 there will be a collapse. I believe that's going to be a lot sooner, to be honest with you, from what we're seeing in our research. And it's a little scary. The multi-stressors that are affecting the ocean overall are compounded, as each of them adds on to the stress that we're seeing around the ecosystems. The important shark and ray areas project that I'm working on is really to identify the criteria to be able to add sharks, rays, and chimeras into national and regional protection measures and be supplemental to things like marine protected areas. The idea there is that we have to protect these animals because, as it was mentioned in the movie also, their life cycle is such that they don't breed fast. They're very long-lived, very slow breeding, and their mass destruction that is happening is really not going to be recoverable if we continue the way we are.
Absolutely, and indeed, as you have mentioned, we've seen an example of marine protection area and how good it is, not just for the animals, but also for the population that live around it, and the various positive examples that we saw. And you mentioned the importance of the life. I looked at the numbers, and it is calculated that the oceans are home to up to 80% of all life in the world. It's not just shark. It's the life existence of humans that is also is concerned by this. And yes, we mentioned the economic issues. So I'll turn to my third panelist, David Vivas. David, you are a legal officer. You work in the Oceans Economy and Fishery program of UNCTAD. UNCTAD, for those who don't know, is the UN Conference on Trade and Development. Welcome. You have a lot of experience in economic and legal issues, and UNCTAD is really an organization that just don't look at one problem, but on the economic problem, the development problem, and the trade problem. So maybe just one word about the legal instruments and the work of the United Nations, maybe on this issue of shark, but maybe also in more general terms, the fishing and development.
One second. Thank you very much for the opportunity. I would like to first make some comments. The shifting of the law of the sea from the UN Close Convention of 1982, the Fish Stocks Agreement of 95, the Port State Measures Agreement of 2010, are pieces that try to regulate fishing and oceans activities all over. Now, the problem with many of these instruments is that they have big holes. The regulatory system is not complete. In many of the elements of the regulatory systems were designed by states to not be accountable. Sorry if I'm going to say some very strong things here. For example, one of the key pillars of the UN clause is the flag state responsibility. That means that a boat fishing in the high seas of X nation, could be X, that nation must monitor, control, and ensure that that vessel complies with international and national law. Okay, also regional regulations by regional fish management organizations. So there is a huge responsibility, but the dispute settlement system in the UN clause is weak. I don't know any country has sued any other country on that grounds, and there are many holes within the system that need to be filled incrementally. The Port State Measure Agreement, for example, is a good recent one that allows port authorities to also initiate enforcement, seizing, and inspection actions that we didn't have before. So usually they were done before, mostly at sea. Now, I would like to take this to a more positive angle, which is I would like to give it's a quite long, but 10 points of what can we do. You know, I prefer to go to solutions because the diagnostic, the film is shocking on the diagnostic, we know, and I've seen worse. So I'm not surprised, and it's important we do something. The first already mentioned, we need to fight IUU fishing, illegal, unregulated, and unreported fishing. Second, we need to manage species. Countries tend only to regulate highly commercial species. They have too many unregulated species. Second, we need to regulate nationally and enforce, like the prohibition on gill nets and the prohibition of certain species to be caught, and the prohibition of certain methods like V hooks that kill the species, etc. We need to make flag states accountable over their boats and the behavior of their boats. We need to expand the scope of regional fish management organizations to cover larger set of species. When the species is not covered, boats come and deplete everything on that particular species. So you have, again, holes in the system that need to be filled. You need to phase out fish subsidies. And I have something if people want to see data. I don't know if I have time, but I can show things that are as shocking as the film. Let me just show you this so people, this goes. I will be sharing a screen. I cannot share a screen. If you allow me, I will show you who are the bad guys. And you will be surprised who they are. I think we need to have consumer education. We need to have producer accountability. We are not the producers, we are not the companies. I'm sorry, who owns the boat? It's not the boat, it's not the captain, it's the company. We go too low in the enforcement system, you know? And we need to expand the CITES list. And I can continue, there are many measures that can be taken. What I don't see is political will. You know, and in all that, we all have to cooperate. We try to do from the Secretariat. We'll have the Fourth Ocean Forum on trade-related aspects of SDG in 1 month. You tell me if I can share the screen to show the list.
David, there are so many questions on the.
I leave that, so curiosity will decide that.
I want to have this interactive, but what you're saying is absolutely right. I think this is exactly the kind of thing. But I'm sure you'd be able to put in some of the things that you were saying when you are answering the questions. I think we are very much into the subject already, so I don't want to go too much backwards, but there are questions on the chat on how the movie has been made, because we feel when we watch the movie that many of the things are not very easy to access, and Peter must know this very well. So we've got questions, for example, from Malina in Manchester that says, how long did it take to make the documentary, and how people could get access to the cruise, to these boats? So I don't know if maybe Peter, since you've been in that movie, and there are other questions about this and also in the chat. So is that possible to understand? How come that all these very illegal, under the table kind of activities you have managed to film?
Well, Eli Roth is a Hollywood director whose work spans several decades. He's most known for his horror films, movies like Hostel and Cabin Fever. And about 3-4 years ago, he died with sharks for the first time in his life. And it was a life-changing experience for him. And when he found out about the threats facing sharks, he decided that he wanted to make the greatest horror movie he's ever made, and it would actually be a documentary film. A lot of the access is through Sea Shepherd, and Sea Shepherd's access is through our government partners around the continent of Africa. And ultimately, when Eli Roth said that he wanted to capture footage of this floating shark slaughterhouse, the Minister of National Defense in Liberia decided to invite him to Liberia and allow him on board the ship. And so it's really through this partnership that we have, that it's not just Sea Shepherd operating in a vacuum, it's Sea Shepherd operating together with state actors, with the political will that's oftentimes lacking, as David said, but in the case of Liberia, the political will exists. And so it's the government of Liberia and the Liberian Coast Guard that allowed Eli Roth to come on board the Libico 2. And of course, what he discovered was really shocking. Alessandra, you mentioned at the beginning that about 100 million sharks are killed every single year. Well, here is one single boat, the Libico 2, that on its own was killing at least 500,000 sharks every single year. And that's just one boat that nobody knew about because this ship was acting in the shadowlands of the oceans and wasn't reporting on its activities. So the 100 million is probably an understatement.
Really incredible. Yeah, let me go back to my moderation role and go back to the questions. And there are a lot of people, David, who are asking that you give all this information. We'll see if we have time because we don't have the whole night, unfortunately. But let me go to another question. I think this person, Harley Brazil, is gone. He or she put something in Harley, I think is a lady, in the chat that she was leaving. But her question is very interesting because she said that as a wildlife biologist, she has always been curious of how population estimates are acquired. I don't know who would like to take this up. Maybe Lynn. How do you actually calculate the number of maybe the people, the population which is killed? You can see and you can extrapolate. How do we calculate? How do we estimate the population of these animals?
Okay, great. It is a great question, and actually, while we were watching the film, I did do a little bit of research on this because even though I have a degree in marine environmental protection, my specialty is not population work. I would suggest that you look up papers by Holmberg, Holmberg, 2009 on population size estimates, the IUCN Red List, which we use a lot of science to find where populations are growing and shrinking so that we can define their vulnerability status. Also a paper by Kanire, Kanire, in 2021 on population growth rates. There are other papers too related to the genetic relatedness and the ability to actually relate the genetics of a species to its population size. Generally across ResearchGate and Google Scholar and various sources there, if you start Googling it, you'll find lots of papers that have different methodologies for estimating this. And of course, you know, we use this when we're looking at fish population stocks and how to gauge those as well. So it's very similar for sharks. And there are lots of papers out there about different species of sharks and their population levels. And that's one of the sets of data overall that we're using within our important sharknary area project is the idea of identifying populations that are really at risk, and which is most of them. And it seems like there is a lot on the web that can show you how those methodologies are used to estimate them. And then I think also with the hard data that you're seeing from the Sea Shepherd work, it's, I mean, you saw the fins in the various markets and the fins on the boats. I mean, you can also do a lot of data analysis on that and get some estimates, I imagine, too.
Sorry, yes, David, if you want to add something, I saw your hand going up. Do you wanted to say something on that? No, okay. So let me go back to the question. Yeah, I think you've touched upon something very interesting. There's something that I think we have seen in the movie, and that there's the data are out there, and a lot of people are taking action. It's not just the very specific action by activists that we have seen at the end, but also simply people demonstrating in the streets, doing things. So that is quite encouraging. But there are a lot of questions on the Q&A about the political will that David was mentioning. So there is Sarah, for example, saying why government let all this happen. Scarlett, who's actually one of our colleagues from UNCTAD, is saying why aren't gill nets illegal? Is there anything like an international convention of commercial fishing practices? And also Raphael says, are there any attempts of regulating fishing on open oceans that are promising, and how to be supported? And there is also Sonia Gomez that says, I was very surprised and shocked with the dual position of certain countries and alliances that we've seen in the movie. What can we do as individuals to change their policies? So I don't know, this is a larger question. Maybe I'll ask to the three of you. Some countries show this willingness, some others don't, some others do, but then they do things on the side that are actually contradicting that willingness. So how do we tackle this? I mean, we also have an answer as UN, but maybe I'll just ask, I just ask this the panelists, whoever wants to start answering this question, which I think is the key one. I don't know, maybe just, yeah, Peter, let's start with you.
Sure, I can address the issue of why do these things happen, and why is the political will missing. I think we have to look at both European fisheries politics and we have to look at Chinese fisheries politics. Chinese population, the populations of fish off the coast of China declined rapidly in the 1980s, and therefore China embarked on their national fisheries plan, which created the distant water fishing fleet, which is now the largest distant water fishing fleet in the world. And that's been created through a combination of subsidies, fuel subsidies, ship construction subsidies, the things that David mentioned. But if the European Union were one country, it would be the second largest country in the world in terms of fishing fleet size. And the European Union fishing fleet is has 2.5 times the fishing capacity of what the European Union fishing fleet can fish in the waters of Europe. And therefore, the European Union has essentially exported the overfishing problem to other parts of the world, areas that historically haven't been overexploited or overfished. And that's why you're seeing these European fishing operators, including the owners of the Libico 2, fishing off the coast of Liberia. These are operators that have already been responsible for the massive decline of sharks in the North Atlantic that are now looking for other places, specifically places that have challenges of monitoring, control, and surveillance. So there is a political will from a lot of these developing countries to actually push back these plundering fleets. But then the reality is, economic resources that are stretched once again. These are places that have issues from human trafficking to drug trafficking to other types of organized crime. And illegal fishing is also a problem that they deal with because of inadequate monitoring, control, and surveillance. So you'll see that there's a political will from the developing countries often, but maybe less so of a political will from the developed countries. And if you look at European fisheries politics in particular, the European Union subsidizes these fishing operators because they want to ensure cheap fish on the European market, and they want to ensure fishing jobs for European fishermen and business for European fishing companies. And that's why there isn't necessarily a huge amount of political will to stop the subsidies within the EU. And that is where some of this really does have to be addressed.
I don't know if Lynn or David would like to take it. I just would like to remind people, if you want to ask questions, please put them in the question and answer, not on the chat, because that goes too fast and we can't really look at all the questions. So just for our audience. Lynn, would you like to pick it up, or David, whatever?
Yeah, briefly, I would like to echo what Peter said, but the issue is so complex with livelihoods and the poverty issue in places, and again, the political will, and how do you convince a country that keeping them alive, like in the Bahamas and in Palau, that it generates more tourism economy money, and can shift the balance there, maybe economically. And again, David, you can speak to this maybe a little better, but it is about shifting the mindset so that it is seen as, you know, a more positive thing to keep them alive, to generate tourism. And of course, tourism has its own issues and brings a lot of challenges as well, but effective, sustainable, well-managed tourism can be a benefit in the days in the future, hopefully when we can travel more after COVID. But I think also it is the issue of understanding, again, these really complex, horrible things. I mean, I'm not a horror movie watcher, and I will agree, if you talk to Mr. Roth, you can tell him this is the worst movie I've ever seen, and it was really scary because it was just so visceral. And if people see this, sometimes they may turn off from the whole issue, but changing their minds, changing the minds of the people in Massachusetts about going to these events. I mean, there is a lot of education that is needed. There's a lot of communication that's needed, advocacy that's needed, and, you know, shifting again the needs so that they aren't dependent on this, you know, for economics, so that if, you know, it can improve this situation that way. I mean, there are so many different factors that are associated with this in terms of being able to bring, you know, the right people to the table and convene the right actors so that you do get something happening policy wise, but then also the enforcement side of it. And, you know, the longer term effects of having things like protected areas that actually do work. You know, so I would say it's very complex, but a lot of people around the world are working on a lot of really positive solutions. So there is some hope. There are direct actions like what Sea Shepherd is doing and others. And then there are the political actions, the convening, the different international conventions that David mentioned as well. I mean, there is work happening. It's just a matter of it being complex and quite slow, unfortunately.
And maybe we'll speak about this a little bit more later on and of the ocean conference too. But David, you wanted to say something.
Yes, to try to respond to some of the questions because there were too many. On gill nets, no, there is no convention prohibiting the gill nets. They are bad because they catch everything. They are not selective. They are mass fishing. Basically, in many countries, they are being incrementally banned, but not everywhere. On new treaties to come, there are 3 that I recommend all the audience to focus and work and help in getting them done. The first is the WTO fish, a potential agreement on fish subsidies to ban and prohibit certain form of fish subsidies. The second one will be the treaty on biodiversity in areas beyond national jurisdiction that will be important also for assessment for marine protected areas, transfer of technology, science and research. Also, there is just agreed yesterday a mandate for a new treaty on plastic pollution at UNEP. So not only mercury gets into the fish, by the way. So you have 3
historical results. It's the first
historical results. So,
with agreements. Go ahead. Sorry.
No. We have to make history now, not yesterday. You know. And yes, on the issue, I got some questions in the chat about registration and the owners. Just to give you ideas, I wrote an article a couple of years ago. I almost got fired, but it's good. You can take a look. Too big to be missed. There are 2.5 or more million fishing boats in the world. The IMO and the FAO lists of boats, and the IMO is a little bit better. It has only 20,000 vessels.
Maybe David, without using too many acronyms as we do in the UN, otherwise people are lost. The IMO is the International Maritime Organization.
2.5 million fishing boats, and the International Maritime Organization and FAO list of vessels is only 27,000. So we don't know no less than 0.001%. These are mainly the big industrial vessels. There are many small, basically those beyond 24 meters of length. So there is a lot to do. Also, a lot of the registration of vessels that is done by countries, and some countries don't provide the right information. So there are platform and databases, but also countries and many others. I think those databases should be open not only to governments, but to many others. We have GPS systems to monitor many vessels, but on fishing is one of the areas where we have less problems. And then you let me, if you want me to show the data. If not, I'll leave it like that.
Let's maybe if you can put some of the data in the chat, and if we can continue.
Not possible because our graph, but as you like, no problem.
Okay.
If
Maybe
people come to the Ocean Forum, they will see it. I just wanted to give a preview, but it's all right.
Yeah, and the Ocean Forum link has been put in the chat, and there is a lot of information there, and we will speak maybe at the end of the Ocean Conference. But there is, and I thank you very much for all this feedback. But there is a third series of questions, I think, on the Q&A that I would like really to tackle before we go to the end of this event, and it's what we can do basically. That is the thing that you feel when you watch this movie and you say, well, okay, but what can I do? I personally was particularly, I'm a vegetarian, almost vegetarian 100%, my family is, but then when you look at the product, the beauty product, and the fact that people are not obliged, I mean, the companies are not obliged to mark down that this squalene substance is used, you really wonder how you can do it. I mean, even with the best possible will as individuals, we cannot know if the sun cream we buy, possibly with a good, mark and maybe a good advertisement about it, and maybe sometimes even saying that it's natural, and then we don't know, that we are contributing to that. So I think questions like, for example, here Marguerite Gendry asked, is there an exhaustive list of products that we can buy in our daily life containing or not containing shark? Or somebody said here in the chat that they would like to know how we could really every day do help. So there were some suggestions at the end of the movie, but maybe you have a little bit more to propose. And it's very heartening to see that young people are very committed to that. But yeah, Peter, please go ahead.
Well, there's no official list out there online of here are the products that don't include shark-based squalene, but there are plenty of products on the market that are labeled having no animal ingredients, or being labeled vegan products, or being labeled cruelty-free, or a combination of those things. So I think as long as people were to stick to that kind of product line, they know with 100% certainty that they're not contributing to shark-based squalene. They're buying 100% vegan certified, organic, sustainable products, then they know that they're not buying. And those are products that are good for all kinds of other reasons beyond being good for sharks also. I think where change really comes about is there are so many people attending this call that have skills and experience. I mean, David has the legal experience, and David sees where there are loopholes and where frameworks have to be strengthened. Lynn has the experience with biology and in certifying certain species as being endangered or critically endangered, which helps drive that political will and build the frameworks that David is helping to create. And where there's law enforcement vacuums, then civil society has to sometimes fill that law enforcement void. And that's where an organization like Sea Shepherd can come in. So if you're working within the United Nations system, I think there's a lot of pride to be gained by the fact that the United Nations Office on Drugs and Crime, the UNODC, is the major international institution that 10 years ago declared illegal, unreported, and unregulated fishing as transnational organized crime. So I think, where do we bring about change? I think everyone has to look at their own life. And if they're a biologist like Lynn, or if they're a legal expert like David, or if they're a person who's spent their entire life at sea like me, it's about seeing where you can kind of plug into that matrix and contribute, because it's really through the combination of all of our actions together that we can bring about change.
while you were answering, I was getting questions from the live Facebook that your organization, Peter, is actually organizing of this debate. So Sea Shepherd has a live Facebook with what we are saying tonight. And there is an additional question here, maybe just to add to the questions that the people on the Q&A have asked, because it's an interesting one. Because you said you can buy products which are animal free. But the question that is coming from one of your audiences, is there a way to make sure that the fish you buy is actually sustainable? So not just those products without animal component, but if you buy something which has an animal component, can we make sure that it's sustainable? Maybe Lynn, I see you nodding, or maybe Peter, you want to add something to that?
No, I think Lynn can take that for sure.
Yeah, maybe Lynn, you could, or David.
No, definitely. I think, again, this goes back to the issue of proper labeling, of proper use of the resources we have, dealing with the illegal and unsustainable fishing practices. And I think if you are really looking to buy sustainable fish, there are lots of resources on the IUCN website and on the web about what is sustainable and what isn't. I just put in the chat also a link to the red list specifically for sharks, but if you're concerned about this, I mean, it's also a concern about how the fish is being labeled. Not all fish that says it's something is something that it is. It's definitely not always labeled properly. And I think, you know, if we go down to the community level, what we were seeing in the movie in the community of the local fishermen, those livelihoods are being impacted by all of the overfishing and by the issues of illegal fishing. And I think if you really are interested, there are lots of resources online to help you find what you need and be able to look at what is maybe MSC certified, which is the Marine Stewardship Council, and possibly looking at, again, asking your grocery, where does this come from? How do you know? What is the chain? You know, where does this come from? How is it processed? Who's selling it, etc. So I would encourage people to learn more about where their food comes from in general. It's quite important, I think. And when we talk about sustainability, it's such a hard topic because we are managing so few things in a very sustainable manner.
Maybe an additional spin to this question that I see here, maybe, I don't know if David, you can answer this, but in the movie, they make it very clear that it's not just an issue of environment and ecosystems, it's also a question of health, human health. So what we are hearing from Peter and from Lynn, if it doesn't exist, maybe not everywhere, regulations on what is in your food or what is in your cream because of environmental reasons, can we just go to that maybe through the health angle? The health angle is, if this is something that is not good for our health, can Association of Consumers pretend maybe to have this kind of labeling that Lynn was mentioning under the health? There was a sentence in the movie, I think it was really great, where they said, if you don't want to do it for sharks, do it for humans.
Yes, it's an excellent point. Health concerns are important. The thing is that the type of health concern mentioned in the film applies to almost all species. You know, applied to tuna, applied to many others. Case of mercury, the case of plastic. So we have also a problem of pollution, dumping pollution on the oceans that has horizontal effects in the entire ocean. So we need to tackle those causes. The issue of health concern is important. Yes, there are many labeling systems. About 14% of all seafood today is certified. The problem is that the 14% that is certified are usually the good guys, the good producers, the responsible producers. So there are many that are not covered or do not find a way that will be an incentive for their markets. There are many small-scale fishers and small and medium enterprises that would like to be certified and improve their system, but they need technical cooperation due to economies of scales, knowledge, capacity, etc. So I think labeling can be a solution, but we need to ensure that we expand labeling also to those willing to make use of it, and not only for the big companies that can comply with.
There are also questions both on our chat and on our question and answer and the Sea Shepherd Live Facebook about the EU. We mentioned basically two areas, two group of countries, the EU and also China was quite mentioned, and everybody's asking, because we have seen times are changing and young people are committing to something different. Is there anything that Christina Jens called building a different kind of society? Is there hope on this political will? And we have heard from Peter that many developing countries actually do cooperate with you. Is there anything that we can expect also from these big players?
I think the European Union has to stop being complicit in the absolute full-scale plundering of our oceans, and ultimately, the European Union is answerable to the European Parliament, and those parliamentarians are answerable to the people who vote them in, and therefore we do need a lot more civil society action to take place. And I just wanted to address a real quick thing on sustainability, Alessandra. Sustainability is what's always mentioned in forums like this. And the question that I always bring up is, what's the metric of how we even start measuring this? We're already talking about a vastly diminished oceans, where the United Nations Food and Agriculture Organization say that 90% of the world's fisheries are either fully exploited or overexploited. There's half the amount of fish in the world's oceans that there was 50 years ago. So if we're talking about sustainability means that we can do the same thing today that we did yesterday or that we did a year ago. What we really need is to bring these fishing pressures off entirely so that the oceans can rewild. If you look at these old accounts by shipping captains who visited North America 300, 400 years ago, they write reports in their navigation logbooks about there being so much cod that they could walk on the backs of cods to shore. Now, we hear accounts like that. We think it's apocryphal. We think it's an exaggeration because we can't imagine an ocean that's that bountiful. And yet there's so many of these accounts out there, and this is before the internet, that there must be some truth to those accounts. We've already adapted to a diminished state. So that's why I think we have to seriously go in hard reverse from the idea of business as usual. We need to overhaul the idea of sustainability and see it for what it oftentimes is, which is kind of a green corporate buzzword, and say, look, we need to seriously review our view of the oceans. For me, I haven't eaten fish in 23 years. And I think people from Sweden, like where I'm from, or in the United States where I live, can make that decision. It's not a decision that the people of Liberia might be able to make, but where an individual can make a decision where they can seriously bring back their impact, I think that's important.
Very much so, and maybe this is a question for David in this context, and it's a little bit more technical question, but I think it's very important because it goes with what we've discussed until now, where we see here it's a lady called Selene from Pew Trusts. She says authorities who track fishing often have a very hard time determining who is the ultimate beneficial owner. So she says, which steps should we take to strengthen countries' registries as part of the financial regulatory system? And would that bring solution in the short term? Maybe David, you want to pick up this?
Yes, it's a excellent question. I tried to answer when I was mentioning that the only register, the two registers that exist on fishing vessels are in the FAO and now in the IMO expanded, because IMO tended to cover cargo fishing, cargo vessels and not fishing vessels. Again, the problem is that mainly countries notify have checked the two databases, and it's funny some countries just don't notify. And then that's what I'm saying, that these systems need to be allowed to obviously include the ship owner and the chain of sale and resale of the boats in these international registers, but we need to allow other actors to introduce information in case non-willing parties do. so avoid doing it. So we need to find a different way to prepare those lists besides the member states themselves. Private sector, fishing associations may also list their own vessels. Yes, they have a hard time finding ownership. It's normal. That's why we have to have transparency on that. And that's another point that not only apply to fishing vessels, but also to fish subsidies, that PU has been acting very strongly on the matter. And I think that's why we need to phase out those fish subsidies, because the operations at sea are basically not economically anymore for about 80% of the operations. So basically a point that everybody has to realize, that if we want to have sustainability, we all will have to eliminate the harmful incentives and be willing to pay at least 3-4 times more the price for the same fish. We will have to pay that price if we want to really have sustainability.
This is a very important point. I see Lynn has opened her mic. Please, Lynn.
Yes, thank you, Alessandra, and thank you, David. I think to re-emphasize here what we've all been saying too is the issue of historically having so many fish you could walk on them to shore. We all of a certain age grew up where when we were in the water diving in the 80s and stuff, we knew how abundant certain ecosystems in California, in my case, were. And I've seen directly in my livelihood or in my life over my time of diving, how much things have crashed. And taking off my IUCN hat here, which I don't have a hat on, but taking off my IUCN hat for a moment, certainly, really restricting fishing and really improving the marine protected areas globally, 30 by 30, increasing areas where literally they are no take zones. It's very hard to manage a protected area for fish because they go in and out of it. They go out into areas that are fished. And I think, again, as we work across, with multiple partners and stakeholders, we need to think about ways that are effective for everybody to benefit from this. But really, if we want to maintain our oceans, maintain the stocks of sharks, of fish, of octopus, go to a grocery store and you see the octopus in plastic containers. It's just, I'm not vegan, but I am very sensitive and I'm very much not a meat eater, but I'm still not vegan yet, working on it. But my opinion on this is really, if we really put some strong limits on things and enforce them, you can see the improvement that happens. One of the places that I've been diving recently, a couple of years ago, is in Portofino in Italy. That is a protected area now. And in 10 years, only 10 years, they're now seeing fish that they haven't seen in 30 years. And it's a matter of thinking about, how do you protect areas? How do you protect species? How do you protect ecosystems, key biodiversity areas, et cetera, so that we all benefit? And I think the sustainability issue, like Peter was saying, is really a valid one. Business as usual, also from an economic standpoint, isn't going to work. We are facing multiple stressors from climate change and from other different things happening to the ocean, that it's changing our ability to use the ocean as a source for food, etc.
And I think, I'm afraid, this will be the mot de la fin, because we had only until 8:30, and we have also, and we've had actually passed the time. I would like to close with a question from Nicolas Avery, who is asking basically, who's the NATO of the ocean? Basically what it means is, who is protecting the future health of the oceans? I think one of our panelists said it's not the future now, so already is the current health of the oceans. And hopefully, we are closing. I'm told of the time. But I just wanted to say, well, I think that what we have learned from what we've heard tonight is that we are all basically entitled to protect our oceans. There is I'm pretty sure you're all quite aware of the Sustainable Development Goals, which have been approved by the international community in 2015, and we have got until 2030 to implement it. There is one SDG, one of these goals, 14, which is called Life Below Water. The idea of that goal is bringing everybody to conserve and sustain, make a sustainable use of the world oceans, seas, and marine resources. And in the Goal 14 implementation, there is specifically the end of illegal and overfishing. So that is something that the countries of the world have adopted. But yes, it doesn't hurt reminding people about it. So we have there is the Global Ocean Forum. The link has been put in the chat. There is also a United Nations Ocean Conference which is coming up. It's going to be held in Lisbon from the 27th of June to the 1st of July. This is really the big conference on ocean. There will be all the partners there. And they will also speak about illegal and unreported and unregulated fishing. There is a person who sort of embeds the work for us at the UN, Ambassador Peter Thompson. He has been designated by the Secretary General of the UN as Special Envoy for the Ocean. And if you want to look at his page, there are a lot of initiatives also from private citizens about this. So I don't know if we are really the native of the oceans or the protector of the oceans. But I think if we put all these goodwills together, things can change. And when I look at the young people in the movie and what they're doing, I'm pretty sure that there is some hope for the future. But I don't want to close myself this discussion. Maybe just give my speakers the opportunity to say a final word before we close. I don't know if maybe let's start with Lynn. Lynn, you want to have the word of the end? And maybe Peter and David too.
Thank you, Alessandra. I think I'd like to thank everyone who attended and stayed for the Q&A and asked some really good questions, and thank David and Peter as well. It's been very educational and very hope-inspiring, I think, for me. I mean, there is a lot we can do. Again, the lobbying of your legislators, stop buying products that have shark fins in them, etc. Stop doing things business as usual. Think about your choices if you can. I mean, I know that is a luxury for a lot of people. It's not necessarily something everyone can do, but getting involved locally and again, lobbying your national and local governments and thinking about, these actions, everybody can make a difference. I think you just need to reach out and find some resources and some science and take that to them and see what that can do to help change things, and follow the Ocean Conference proceedings, the SDG proceedings, and hopefully overall ocean health will improve over the next few decades, I think. So I just want to encourage everyone that all hope is not lost, and we can do more as we each do a little bit.
Indeed, and a lot of people put in the chat suggestions on how to act on this. Peter, you want to have a...
Sure. I think the challenges facing the oceans can feel so overwhelming at times that it's important to focus on where we do have successes and where we do have victories. And what we have to do is come together and identify these critical areas of biodiversity that we have to protect. I mean, we can't necessarily protect the entire oceans, but we can identify these critical areas where we can draw our line in the sand, where we can push back from poachers that plunder these areas for way too long. Places like the Gulf of Guinea, where Sea Shepherd is working. And I think it's important, it's devastating to think about 73 million to 273 million sharks are killed every single year. Whenever I think about that number, I think about the Libico 2, the vessel that you all saw in this film. That ship has not been out to fish since it was arrested. It was detained in Liberia for about 5.5 months. After being released, after paying a fine, it went to Senegal, where it was immediately rearrested in Senegal. And since then, it hasn't been out to sea. That was 2.5 years ago. So this is a ship that on its own was killing over 500,000 sharks every single year. And because of the actions by the Liberian Coast Guard, supported by Sea Shepherd, supported by people like all of you, over 1 million sharks have been saved to date by just the arrest of this one vessel. So please support organizations like Sea Shepherd that are on the front lines defending marine wildlife, and support the important work that Lynn is doing with the IUCN and the important work that David is doing at the United Nations. And it's a real honor for me to share a panel with all of you. And thank you so much for taking some time out of your day to watch this film.
Thank you, Peter. And David, your word of ending.
Thank you. Yes, a short anecdote and a key message. Short anecdote, I remember a rich couple of friends asked me 5 years ago, they wanted to give all their wedding gift for a good cause. And I remember I told them, put the money at Sea Shepherd. So just to tell, that's true. I totally agree. So I hope you got the money. Besides that, a key message, you know, we always say in my branch, we are in the trade and environment branch in Ontario, we're the kind of the hippies of the building. And the only thing we can say is the only problem with nature is human nature. And it is time we change our nature. We are the biggest predator in the planet. We are the ones that have to stop ourselves from making more mistakes.
And with this incredibly wise word of warning, I would like to close this session. I would like to thank, of course, our panelists for not only their participation tonight, but also for their great work. I'd like to thank very much everybody who has followed us, not only on this platform, but also on the Facebook page of Sea Shepherd. Let me also thank our faithful partner, the Geneva Welcome Center, who has been promoting and supporting us on UN Geneva, and also the colleagues of the UN Information Center in Brussels who have been sending out the invitation. And let me thank also Catherine Feglin, Ali Kafan in my team, and Nathalie Maspoli-Taylor, who have been supporting this event technically very efficiently too. Thank you very much to you all. I hope you'll be with us for the next CineONU, and that you will be able to follow all these various conferences and act every day to protect wildlife. And I will really finish with the words of the Secretary General, who is in his message of World Wildlife Day, that, as you know, is today, is saying that on this World Wildlife Day, let us commit to preserving our invaluable and irreplaceable wildlife for the benefit and the delight of current and future generations. Thank you very much to you all. Goodbye.